The helicopter blades cut through the Afghan morning air like a razor through silk. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen pressed his medical kit closer to his chest as the Black Hawk descended toward the remote outpost. 3 years as a Navy SEAL medic had taught him to read situations before his boots hit the ground. And something felt wrong about this call. Multiple casualties. Unknown origin. The pilot had briefed him during the 20-minute flight from base. Small outpost mixed unit. They're requesting immediate medical assistance. Marcus had seen enough combat to know that unknown origin usually meant friendly fire or something the brass didn't want discussed over open channels. His hands automatically checked his supplies one more time. Morphine, bandages, surgical tools, blood clotting agents. Everything a battlefield medic needed to keep people breathing until they could reach a real hospital. The outpost materialized below them like a small fortress carved into the mountainside. Concrete barriers, sandbags, and camouflage netting created a defensive perimeter around several prefab buildings. Smoke was still rising from what looked like a damaged communications tower. As the helicopter touched down, Marcus could see soldiers running toward them. Their faces carried that particular expression he knew too well. The look of people who had just survived something terrible and weren't sure it was over. A sergeant with dust-covered fatigues jogged up to the chopper before the rotors had fully stopped spinning. "You the medic?" he shouted over the noise. Marcus nodded and grabbed his gear. "How many wounded?" "4 confirmed, maybe more. We've got them in the aid station." The sergeant's voice cracked slightly. "It's bad, Doc, really bad." Marcus followed him across the compound, his trained eye taking in the damage. Scorch marks on the wall suggested an explosion, but the pattern was wrong for incoming mortars or rockets. This looked like something had blown up from inside the perimeter. The aid station was a converted shipping container with red crosses painted on the sides. Even before Marcus stepped inside, he could smell the metallic scent of blood mixed with antiseptic. The sounds hit him next. Low moans, someone calling for their mother, the steady beeping of a heart monitor running on battery power. Inside, chaos. 3 wounded soldiers lay on stretchers while a 4th sat propped against the wall, clutching a blood-soaked bandage to his shoulder. A young private was doing his best to apply pressure to a leg wound on one of the stretcher patients, but his hands were shaking badly. Marcus immediately went into combat medic mode. His training took over, pushing aside questions about what had happened here. Save lives first, ask questions later. "Talk to me," he called out to no one in particular. "What are we dealing with?" "Explosion in the motor pool," the sergeant explained while Marcus knelt beside the most seriously wounded soldier. "Johnson here caught the worst of it. Shrapnel to the chest and abdomen." Marcus's hands moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away the makeshift bandages to assess the damage. The soldier, Johnson, was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. Blood loss, possible internal injuries, definitely needed surgery that Marcus couldn't provide here. "I need to stabilize him for transport," Marcus said, already pulling supplies from his kit. "What's your ETA on medical evacuation?" The sergeant's expression darkened. "That's the problem, Doc. Communications are down. The explosion took out our radio array. We can't call for medevac." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The pressure that came with knowing lives depended on decisions made in the next few minutes. Without proper medical facilities, Johnson had maybe an hour. The others were stable enough for now, but that could change quickly. He moved to the next patient, a female soldier who was conscious but pale from blood loss. She had taken shrapnel to her left arm and side, but the wounds looked manageable. As he began cleaning the injury on her arm, something caught his eye. There, on her uniform sleeve, was an emblem he hadn't seen in 3 years. A small patch, barely 2 inches wide, showing a stylized mountain peak with a star above it. Most people wouldn't recognize it, but Marcus did. His hands froze for just a moment, the antiseptic-soaked gauze halfway to her wound. The patch belonged to the 4th Mountain Division Special Operations Support Unit, the same unit his brother David had been assigned to before he died in a classified operation near the Pakistani border. The same unit that had never given Marcus or his family any real answers about what happened that night. The wounded soldier noticed his hesitation. Her eyes were alert despite the pain, and she was studying his face with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. "You recognize it," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question. Marcus forced himself to focus on treating her wounds, but his mind was racing. What were the odds that he would end up treating a soldier from David's old unit, in a war zone thousands of miles from home, in a remote outpost that wasn't even supposed to exist according to most military maps? "I need to focus on your injuries right now," he said, applying fresh bandages to her arm. But even as he worked, he could feel her eyes on him, watching his every move. The soldier in the corner with the shoulder wound spoke up. "Doc, we haven't been properly introduced. I'm Corporal Williams. The lady you're working on is Sergeant Rivera. Johnson there on the stretcher is our demo expert." He paused, wincing as he adjusted his position. "And the explosion that got us? It wasn't an accident." Marcus looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Rivera grabbed his wrist with surprising strength for someone who had lost as much blood as she had. "Your name," she said urgently. "What's your name?" "Staff Sergeant Chen, Marcus Chen." He tried to pull away, but her grip tightened. "Chen," she repeated, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or fear. "Marcus Chen from Sacramento? Brother was David Chen?" The medical kit slipped from Marcus's other hand, instruments scattering across the floor. Around them, the sounds of the wounded seemed to fade into background noise. How could she possibly know about David? "How do you—" he started, but Rivera cut him off. "We need to talk," she said, her voice urgent despite her injuries. "But not here. Not in front of the others." Her eyes darted toward Williams and the unconscious Johnson. "Your brother didn't die the way they told you. And what happened here today? It's connected." Marcus felt the world tilting around him. 3 years of unanswered questions. 3 years of official reports that made no sense. 3 years of trying to understand why David had been in that remote valley when his unit was supposed to be 40 miles away. And now, in the middle of treating casualties from an explosion that wasn't an accident, he was face to face with someone who claimed to know the truth. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both look toward the entrance. The sergeant who had met Marcus at the helicopter was returning, and he wasn't alone. 2 soldiers in clean uniforms, too clean for a forward outpost, were walking with him. Marcus noticed they weren't carrying the standard equipment of regular infantry. These looked like intelligence personnel. Rivera's grip on his wrist tightened again. "Whatever they tell you," she whispered desperately, "don't believe them. And don't let them separate us. Your brother found something he wasn't supposed to find. Now they think we know what it is." The footsteps were getting closer. Marcus looked down at Rivera, seeing something in her eyes that chilled him more than the morning mountain air. It was the same look David had worn in their last video call, the expression of someone who knew they were in danger but couldn't explain why. As the intelligence officer stepped into the aid station, Marcus realized that this wasn't just another medical call. This was the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than treating combat wounds. The emblem on Rivera's uniform wasn't just a coincidence. It was a message, and understanding what it meant might be the key to finally learning the truth about his brother's death. The 2 intelligence officers entered the aid station with the kind of practiced calm that Marcus had learned to distrust. The older one, a lieutenant colonel based on his rank insignia, surveyed the wounded with cold efficiency. His partner, a captain with pale eyes and a face that revealed nothing, focused immediately on Rivera. "Sergeant Rivera," the lieutenant colonel said, his voice carrying false concern. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. We're here to debrief you and your team about the incident." Rivera's hand was still gripping Marcus's wrist, though she tried to make it look casual. "Sir, I think medical treatment should be the priority right now." Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Sergeant Chen, isn't it?" He turned to Marcus. "We appreciate you responding so quickly. How are the casualties?" Marcus forced himself to focus on the medical situation, though every instinct was screaming that something was wrong. "Johnson needs immediate surgical intervention. He won't survive transport without stabilization. The others are manageable, but I need to complete treatment before anyone goes anywhere." "Understood," Hayes said. "Captain Morrison and I will just need a few minutes with each of your patients. Standard procedure after an unexplained explosion." The word unexplained hung in the air like a challenge. Williams, the soldier with the shoulder wound, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, with respect, there wasn't anything unexplained about it. Someone sabotaged our equipment." Morrison spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying threat. "Corporal Williams, you're obviously disoriented from your injuries. Perhaps we should discuss this privately." Marcus continued working on Rivera's wounds, but he was listening to every word. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. These weren't standard intelligence officers conducting a routine investigation. They were here for a specific purpose, and it involved Rivera. "Doc," Rivera said quietly, positioning herself so the officers couldn't see her lips. "My medical records. They're in my left cargo pocket. Take them when you check for other injuries." Marcus nodded almost imperceptibly and continued his examination. When he reached her leg to check for additional shrapnel wounds, he palmed the small notebook she had indicated. The leather cover was stained with blood, but he could feel papers inside. Hayes was growing impatient. "Sergeant Rivera, we need to discuss your team's mission parameters. There seem to be some discrepancies in your operational reports." "I'm sure any discrepancies can wait until after medical treatment," Rivera replied evenly, but Marcus could feel the tension in her body, the way her muscles were coiled despite her injuries. Johnson, the unconscious demolitions expert, began to stir on his stretcher. His eyelids fluttered, and he made a weak sound that might have been an attempt at speech. Marcus immediately moved to check his vitals, but Morrison was faster. The captain leaned over Johnson, speaking in low, urgent tones that Marcus couldn't quite catch. Whatever he said made Johnson's eyes widen in apparent fear, and he tried to sit up despite his injuries. "Easy," Marcus said, gently pushing Johnson back down. "You've been badly injured. Don't try to move." But Johnson was looking past Marcus, staring at Morrison with something like terror. "They know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "About the cash. About everything." Morrison straightened quickly, his face expressionless. "The patient is clearly delirious from blood loss. Perhaps we should sedate him for transport." Marcus's medical training kicked in. Johnson's pupils were responsive. His speech was coherent despite being quiet, and his vital signs didn't suggest delirium. He was scared, not confused. "Sedation isn't indicated," Marcus said firmly. "He needs surgery, not drugs." Hayes stepped closer to the stretcher. "Sergeant Chen, I'm ordering you to sedate this patient. He's clearly unstable and could be dangerous." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. In 3 years as a SEAL medic, no one had ever ordered him to provide unnecessary medication to a patient. It violated every principle of combat medicine, not to mention medical ethics in general. "Sir, I can't do that. It would be against medical protocol and could compromise his condition for surgery." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Hayes's mask of professional courtesy slipped slightly. "Sergeant, you seem to be forgetting who's in command here." Rivera tried to sit up, wincing from her wounds. "Colonel Hayes, perhaps you could explain what authority you have over medical personnel treating wounded soldiers." It was a carefully worded challenge, and Marcus noticed that Rivera's question had legal implications. Military medical personnel operated under different rules than regular combat troops, especially when it came to patient care. Morrison whispered something to Hayes, who nodded grimly. "Very well. We'll arrange for immediate medical evacuation for all casualties. The helicopter should be here within the hour." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. An hour ago they had said communications were down and medevac wasn't possible. Now suddenly they could arrange immediate evacuation? And why were intelligence officers coordinating medical transport? Williams spoke up from his position against the wall. "Sir, what about the investigation into the sabotage? Shouldn't we secure the scene first?" Hayes didn't even look at him. "The scene has been secured, Corporal. Your team's mission here is complete." "But we haven't completed the mission," Williams protested. "We were supposed to locate and secure the equipment cache that Intel identified. We barely started the search when everything went to hell." Morrison's head snapped toward Williams so fast it was almost a blur. "What cache, Corporal?" Williams looked confused, glancing between his wounded teammates. "The cache that your people told us to find. The weapons and communications equipment allegedly left behind by insurgents." Marcus was watching Rivera carefully, and he saw her face go pale beneath the blood and dirt. Whatever cache Williams was talking about, it wasn't what Rivera had expected to find. "There is no official record of any cache in this area," Hayes said smoothly. "Your team was here for routine reconnaissance only." "That's not," Williams started, but Rivera cut him off with a sharp look. "The corporal is confused from his injuries," she said quickly. "We were conducting routine patrols only," but Marcus could see the lie in her eyes. More than that, he could see fear, real bone-deep terror that she was trying to hide behind military discipline. Johnson was trying to speak again, his voice stronger now despite his injuries. "The coordinates," he whispered, looking directly at Marcus. "Your brother." He left coordinates. The medical kit fell from Marcus's hands for the second time, instruments scattering across the floor. Hayes and Morrison exchanged a look that confirmed every suspicion Marcus had been developing. "How do you know about my brother?" Marcus asked, his voice barely controlled. Hayes stepped between them. "Sergeant Chen, your patient is delirious. Blood loss can cause hallucinations and false memories." But Johnson wasn't looking delirious. He was looking desperate, like a man who knew he might not get another chance to speak. "Valley of the Stone Dogs," he whispered. "That's where your brother found it. That's where they killed him." Morrison moved faster than Marcus would have thought possible. Before anyone could react, he had produced a syringe and injected something into Johnson's IV line. Within seconds, the wounded soldier's eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness. "What did you give him?" Marcus demanded, checking Johnson's pulse and breathing. "Just a mild sedative," Morrison said calmly. He was becoming agitated. Marcus looked at the syringe Morrison was capping. The label was partially torn, but he could make out part of it. Not a sedative. Something much stronger and potentially dangerous for someone with Johnson's injuries. Rivera was staring at Morrison with open hatred now. "You son of a—" "Sergeant Rivera," Hayes interrupted. "I think it's time we had that private conversation." Two more soldiers entered the aid station. Marcus noticed they weren't wearing the same unit patches as the original outpost personnel. These were Hayes's people, and they were armed. "Sergeant Chen," Hayes continued, "thank you for your service here. Your helicopter is being refueled and will be ready to transport you back to base shortly." Marcus looked around the room. Williams was watching everything with growing alarm. Rivera was trying to communicate something with her eyes. Johnson was unconscious, possibly drugged with something that could kill him. "I'm not leaving without my patients," Marcus said firmly. Hayes smiled again, the same cold expression from before. "I'm afraid that's not an option. These soldiers will be transported to a different medical facility, one more suited to their particular old conditions." Marcus understood. They were going to disappear. All of them. Rivera, Williams, Johnson, and probably Marcus too if he didn't play this carefully. Rivera had been right. This wasn't about treating wounded soldiers. This was about covering up whatever David had discovered 3 years ago, and whatever this team had stumbled onto that morning. The notebook Rivera had given him felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. Whatever was written in there, it was important enough for people to kill for, important enough to stage an explosion and eliminate witnesses. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't leaving these soldiers behind, and he wasn't going to let David's death remain unexplained any longer. He just had to figure out how to get them all out alive. Marcus pretended to check his medical supplies while his mind raced through possibilities. The notebook in his pocket seemed to weigh 100 pounds, and Hayes's 2 armed soldiers were positioning themselves near the exits. Whatever was about to happen, he had maybe minutes to act. "Colonel Hayes," Marcus said, standing slowly and facing the intelligence officer, "I need to speak with you privately about Johnson's condition. Medical confidentiality requires that I discuss certain aspects of his treatment with the ranking officer." It was a gamble, but Marcus was counting on Hayes's need to maintain appearances. The man couldn't simply execute a Navy SEAL medic without some kind of justification, especially with witnesses present. Hayes nodded curtly. "Of course. Captain Morrison, please continue monitoring the patients." Marcus led Hayes to the far corner of the aid station, putting as much distance as possible between them and the others. "Johnson's injuries are more severe than I initially assessed," he said in a low voice. "He's showing signs of internal bleeding that could prove fatal if not addressed immediately." While he spoke, Marcus was actually watching Rivera in his peripheral vision. She had managed to catch Williams's attention and was using subtle hand signals that looked like routine military communication. Whatever she was telling him, Williams' expression grew increasingly grim. "How long does he have?" Hayes asked, playing along with the medical consultation. "Without proper surgery, maybe 30 minutes. That drug Morrison gave him is suppressing his breathing, which is exactly the wrong treatment for his condition." Hayes studied Marcus's face. "And what do you recommend, Sergeant?" "Immediate evacuation to a full surgical facility, not whatever black site medical facility you're planning to use." The mask slipped again, and Marcus saw the real Hayes underneath. Cold, calculating, and completely without conscience. "You're very perceptive, Sergeant Chen. Perhaps too perceptive for your own good." "The way my brother was too perceptive?" Hayes smiled. "David was an excellent soldier. Unfortunately, he developed an unhealthy curiosity about operations that didn't concern him." Marcus felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry wouldn't help anyone survive the next few minutes. "What did he find?" "The same thing Sergeant Rivera's team was sent to find," Hayes said quietly. "A cache of equipment that officially doesn't exist. Equipment that could prove embarrassing to certain people if it ever surfaced." Behind Hayes, Marcus could see Morrison moving between the wounded soldiers. The captain was doing something to their IV lines, probably drugging them into unconsciousness. Rivera was still awake but barely, her eyes fighting to stay focused. "What kind of equipment?" Marcus pressed. Hayes seemed to be enjoying the conversation. "Communications gear, mainly. Recording devices. The kind of things that might contain conversations between American military personnel and certain foreign nationals. Conversations about activities that never officially occurred." Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. Arms dealing. Someone in the military was selling weapons to insurgents, and David found evidence. David found more than evidence. He found the actual meeting location and recorded several transactions. Unfortunately for him, he also found out who was running the operation. "You?" Hayes shrugged. "I'm just middle management, Sergeant. The real decision-makers are much higher up the chain of command. But yes, I coordinate certain aspects of the business." Marcus glanced toward the wounded soldiers. Morrison had finished whatever he was doing, and all three were now unconscious. Rivera had fought the drugs longer than the others, but her eyes were finally closing. "So you killed him," Marcus said, turning back to Hayes. "David killed himself, really. All he had to do was file his routine patrol report and forget what he saw. Instead, he started asking questions, making copies of recordings, planning to take his concerns up the chain of command." Hayes shook his head sadly. "Very unfortunate decision. And Rivera's team? They were sent here to recover David's evidence before anyone else could find it. Unfortunately, they were a little too successful. They found not only David's recordings, but also a more recent cache of communications equipment that contained some very sensitive conversations." Marcus realized with growing horror that Rivera's team hadn't been caught up in some random conspiracy. They had been sent here specifically because of David's death, which meant someone in the chain of command knew exactly what had happened to his brother. "Who gave them the mission?" Marcus asked. Hayes checked his watch. "That's not really relevant anymore. What matters is that all loose ends are about to be tied up very neatly." Morrison appeared at Hayes' shoulder. "Sir, the patients are stable for transport. The helicopter should be here in 15 minutes. Marcus looked at the three unconscious soldiers. Whatever Morrison had given them, it was strong enough to keep them under for hours. Long enough to transport them somewhere isolated where they could be eliminated quietly. "What about me?" Marcus asked. "I assume I'm not flying back to base." Hayes actually looked regretful. "You really should have just treated the wounded and left, Sergeant. But you recognized that unit patch, didn't you? The moment you saw Rivera's uniform, you knew this was connected to David." Marcus didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. "The official report will say that your helicopter was shot down by insurgent forces while evacuating casualties," Hayes continued. "Very tragic. Your family will receive full military honors." The sound of approaching rotor blades filled the air. Marcus realized he was almost out of time. Whatever he was going to do, it had to be now. "Can I check on my patients one more time?" he asked. Professional courtesy. Hayes nodded, apparently seeing no harm in letting a condemned man comfort the wounded. "Make it quick." Marcus moved to Rivera's stretcher first. She appeared unconscious, but when he checked her pulse, her eyes flickered open slightly. She was fighting the drugs with everything she had. "Can you move?" he whispered, pretending to check her bandages. Her response was barely a twitch of her fingers, but it was enough. She was still functional, just barely. Marcus moved to Williams next. The corporal was deeper under, but Marcus could tell from his breathing that he would wake up eventually. Johnson was the wild card. Whatever Morrison had injected into his system on top of his existing injuries made his condition critical. The helicopter was getting louder. Marcus made his decision. He palmed a scalpel from his medical kit and moved back toward Hayes, staying casual. Morrison was by the entrance, watching the approaching aircraft. The two armed soldiers were relaxed, assuming the situation was under control. "Colonel," Marcus said, stepping close to Hayes as if he wanted to say something privately, "I just want you to know that I understand why you had to do this." Hayes looked surprised but pleased. "I'm glad you can be reasonable about it, Sergeant." Marcus moved the scalpel to Hayes's throat in one smooth motion, keeping his body between the blade and Morrison's line of sight. "Actually, what I understand is that you murdered my brother, and now you're going to help me get these soldiers out of here alive." Hayes went very still. "Sergeant Chen, you're making a serious mistake." "The only mistake I made was believing the official report about David's death," Marcus said quietly. "Now call off your people or I open your carotid artery right here." Morrison had noticed something was wrong and was starting to move toward them. Marcus pressed the scalpel deeper, and a thin line of blood appeared on Hayes's neck. "Captain Morrison," Hayes called out, his voice carefully controlled, "please maintain your position. Sergeant Chen and I are having a productive discussion." Morrison stopped, but his hand had moved to his sidearm. The two soldiers by the entrance were also beginning to look alert. Marcus knew he had bought himself maybe 30 seconds before the situation exploded into violence. 30 seconds to figure out how to get 3 wounded soldiers and himself out of a fortified outpost, surrounded by people who wanted them dead. Rivera's eyes were open now, and she was watching everything with growing awareness. Whatever Morrison had given them was wearing off faster than expected, probably because she had been fighting it from the beginning. The helicopter was close enough now that dust was starting to swirl through the aid station. In less than 5 minutes, Hayes's extraction team would be on the ground, and Marcus's window of opportunity would close forever. He looked at Rivera, then at Hayes, then at the various weapons and equipment scattered around the room. A desperate plan began forming in his mind. It was insane, probably suicidal, and depended on too many variables beyond his control. But it was the only chance any of them had. Marcus had one advantage that Hayes didn't know about. 3 years of SEAL training had taught him to think and react faster than most people could follow. While holding the scalpel to Hayes's throat with his right hand, he used his left to grab a smoke grenade from the colonel's tactical vest. "What are you doing?" Hayes hissed. "Buying time," Marcus replied, pulling the pin with his teeth. "Rivera, can you move?" Rivera was already rolling off her stretcher, grabbing her rifle from where it had been propped against the wall. The drugs were clearly wearing off faster than Morrison had anticipated. "Williams, wake up," she called to the corporal. Morrison drew his weapon, but Marcus was ready. He shoved Hayes forward as the smoke grenade detonated, filling the aid station with thick gray clouds. In the confusion, Rivera's rifle barked twice and Marcus heard one of the armed soldiers cry out. "Johnson's too injured to move," Rivera shouted over the chaos. "We have to carry him." Williams was stirring but still groggy. Marcus grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him upright. "Can you walk?" "I think so," Williams mumbled, shaking his head to clear it. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as Hayes's people tried to shoot through the smoke. Marcus heard bullets ricocheting off the metal walls of the aid station. They had maybe 30 seconds before the smoke cleared enough for accurate shooting. Rivera had moved to Johnson's stretcher and was trying to lift him. "Help me," she called to Marcus. But Johnson was conscious again, his eyes wide with pain and fear. "Leave me," he whispered.
"Get the evidence out."
"That's what matters." "Nobody gets left behind," Marcus said firmly, grabbing one end of the stretcher. Rivera took the other end, and they lifted Johnson between them. Williams was on his feet now, swaying but mobile. He had picked up one of the fallen soldier's weapons. "Back exit," Rivera said, nodding toward a door Marcus hadn't noticed before. "Leads to the motor pool." They moved through the smoke, Johnson's stretcher between them. Behind them, Marcus could hear Hayes shouting orders, trying to coordinate his people despite the chaos. The back door led to a narrow alley between the aid station and what had once been a vehicle maintenance area. Most of the trucks and equipment had been damaged in the explosion that had wounded Rivera's team, but Marcus could see one Humvee that looked intact. "Keys?" he asked. Williams patted his pockets and produced a set. Johnson had them when everything went to hell. They loaded Johnson into the back of the Humvee as gently as possible, but Marcus could see the movement was causing him significant pain. His breathing was becoming more labored and his color was getting worse. Rivera climbed into the passenger seat while Williams got behind the wheel. Marcus squeezed into the back with Johnson, trying to monitor his vital signs while keeping an eye out for pursuit. The helicopter was landing in the main compound now, and Marcus could see Hayes's reinforcements deploying. At least a dozen soldiers in unmarked uniforms, all carrying automatic weapons. "Drive," Marcus told Williams. "Now!" The Humvee roared to life and lurched forward, crashing through the motor pool's chain link gate. Williams might have been groggy from drugs, but his driving was solid. He took the vehicle off-road immediately, heading up into the rocky terrain that surrounded the outpost. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked, checking Johnson's pulse. It was getting weaker. Rivera pulled out a GPS device and a folded map. "There's a cache about 5 miles north of here." "David's cache? That's what we came here to find." "And Hayes's people know about it?" "They know it exists. They don't know exactly where it is." Rivera looked back at Johnson. "How is he?" Marcus was honest. "Not good. He needs surgery within the hour, or he's not going to make it." Johnson grabbed Marcus's wrist with surprising strength. "The cache," he whispered. "Everything your brother found is there. Recordings, documents, photographs, proof of the whole operation." "Johnson, save your strength." "No, listen." Johnson's voice was urgent despite his weakness. Hayes wasn't lying about David being killed for what he found. But there's more. The arms dealing is just the beginning. They're selling information too. Troop movements, operational plans, everything. Marcus felt sick. To who? Anyone with enough money. Insurgents, foreign governments, criminal organizations. Your brother stumbled onto the biggest intelligence leak in military history. Rivera was studying the GPS. "Williams, take the next ridge path. We need to stay off the main roads." Behind them, dust clouds were rising from the outpost. Hayes's people were following, probably in multiple vehicles. Marcus could see at least 2 helicopters in the air now, both heading in their direction. "They're going to catch us before we reach the cache," Williams said, taking the Humvee up a steep, rocky path. "This thing isn't built for extended off-road running." Rivera checked her rifle and the spare magazines she had grabbed. "Then we make a stand. Find a defensible position and hold them off until we can get to the evidence." Marcus was still working on Johnson, trying to stop the internal bleeding that was slowly killing him. "There's another option," he said quietly. "What?" "We split up. Rivera and I take Johnson to the cache. Williams takes the Humvee and leads the pursuit away from us." Williams looked back at them through the rearview mirror. "That's a suicide mission for me." "Maybe. But it's the only way Johnson survives long enough to tell someone what really happened here. And it's the only way we get to David's evidence." Rivera was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing their options. "There's a third option," she said finally. "We get to the cache, but we don't just collect the evidence. We use it." "What do you mean?" "David didn't just record Hayes and his people. He recorded everyone involved in the operation, including the people giving Hayes his orders." Rivera held up a satellite phone she had taken from one of the fallen soldiers. "This has encrypted communication capabilities. If we can access David's recordings, we can broadcast them to multiple recipients simultaneously." Marcus understood. "Blow the whole thing wide open at once. Make it impossible for them to cover up." "Exactly. But we have to reach the cache first." The Humvee crested a ridge, and they could see their destination in the distance. A narrow valley between 2 rocky outcroppings that looked exactly like the geological formation Johnson had mentioned. The Valley of the Stone Dogs. They could also see their pursuers. 4 vehicles were following their trail, and the helicopters were closing in from 2 directions. Hayes had committed significant resources to stopping them, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about how important David's evidence really was. Johnson was getting weaker. His breathing was shallow and irregular, and Marcus could see that he was losing the battle against his injuries. But his eyes were still alert, still focused. "Doctor," Johnson whispered, "promise me something. Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. Promise me you'll get the truth out. About David, about all of it. People need to know what really happened." Marcus met his eyes. "I promise," Johnson smiled weakly. "Your brother was a good man. He died trying to do the right thing." Williams had pushed the Humvee as hard as it would go, but the engine was starting to overheat, and the terrain was getting rougher. They were maybe half a mile from the valley when the first helicopter appeared over the ridge behind them. "Contact rear," Rivera called out, raising her rifle. The helicopter opened fire, sending bullets whining past the Humvee. Williams yanked the wheel hard left, sending them sliding sideways down a rocky slope. The maneuver saved their lives but cost them precious time. "We're not going to make it in this thing," Williams shouted over the engine noise and gunfire. Rivera was already moving. "Stop here. We go on foot from this point." Marcus looked at Johnson, who was barely conscious now. Carrying him would slow them down, but leaving him wasn't an option. "Can you walk?" he asked. Johnson tried to sit up but collapsed back onto the stretcher. "Go without me. I'll buy you time." "No way." But Johnson was already reaching for Williams's sidearm. "I'm dying anyway, Doc. Let me make it count for something." Marcus realized with growing horror that Johnson was right. His injuries were too severe and they were too far from proper medical care. But that didn't make the decision any easier. Rivera made it for them. "Williams, help me get Johnson into a firing position behind those rocks. Marcus, grab whatever medical supplies you can carry. We move in 60 seconds. The next few minutes were chaos. They established Johnson in a defensive position with a clear view of the approaching vehicles. Rivera divided their remaining ammunition between Johnson and Williams, keeping just enough for the journey ahead. The helicopters were circling now, looking for a safe landing zone. Marcus could see Hayes's ground vehicles picking their way up the rocky slope, still several minutes away but closing fast. Johnson gripped Marcus's hand one final time. "Valley of the Stone Dogs," he repeated. "Your brother's cache is in a cave about halfway up the north wall. Look for the marking he carved into the rock." "What marking?" "A medical cross, like the one on your kit." Johnson's smile was peaceful despite the pain. He said if anything happened to him, a medic would be the one person who might understand what he found. Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. Even in death, David had been thinking ahead, trying to ensure the truth would eventually come out. Rivera was pulling on his arm. "We have to go, now." Marcus grabbed his medical kit and followed Rivera and Williams away from the Humvee. Behind them, Johnson opened fire on the first helicopter, his shots forcing it to pull back and reassess its approach. The Valley of the Stone Dogs was aptly named. The rock formations on either side looked like massive canine heads, their mouths open in eternal howls. Marcus could see why David had chosen this place. It was isolated, defensible, and unlikely to be stumbled upon by accident. They made it halfway to the valley mouth before the shooting started behind them. Johnson was putting up a fierce fight, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. Marcus forced himself not to look back. Rivera was setting a punishing pace despite her injuries. She knew this terrain, had studied it during mission planning. Williams was struggling to keep up, still feeling the effects of Morrison's drugs. "There." Rivera pointed to a narrow ledge about 200 feet up the north wall of the valley. "I can see the cave opening." Marcus squinted and could just make out a dark shadow in the rock face. Getting there would require climbing, and climbing would make them exposed to fire from the helicopters. The sound of gunfire behind them was diminishing. Johnson's last stand was coming to an end. Williams collapsed against a boulder, breathing hard. "I can't make that climb. Not in my condition." Rivera assessed his pale complexion and shaking hands. "You're right. Stay here and cover our ascent. If Hayes's people get too close, fall back to that narrow passage we passed. Force them to come at you one at a time." Marcus looked at the climb ahead of them. 200 feet of exposed rock face with Rivera wounded and both of them exhausted. Behind them, Hayes's forces would be advancing as soon as they finished with Johnson. "Ready?" Rivera asked, checking her rifle one more time. Marcus shouldered his medical kit and looked up at the cave. Somewhere up there was the evidence that would explain David's death and expose the conspiracy that had killed him. Evidence that might prevent other soldiers from dying to protect corrupt officers' profits. "Let's go get my brother's story," he said. The climb began. The rock face was more treacherous than it looked from below. What had appeared to be solid handholds crumbled under their weight, and loose stones cascaded down with every movement. Marcus tried to stay directly below Rivera to catch any rocks that might fall, but she was climbing with the desperation of someone who knew pursuit was only minutes behind. 50 feet up, Rivera's wounded arm gave out. She slipped sideways, grabbing frantically for purchase on the rough stone. Marcus lunged upward and caught her boot just as she was about to fall. "I've got you," he said, bracing himself against the rock face. Rivera found a new handhold and paused to catch her breath. Blood was seeping through the bandages on her arm where the climbing had reopened her wounds. "Thanks. I thought I was done for." Below them, Williams had taken up position behind a large boulder at the valley entrance. Marcus could see dust clouds approaching. Hayes's vehicles were almost through the rocky terrain. "How much farther?" Marcus asked. Rivera looked up. "Maybe 50 more feet. But the angle gets steeper." A rifle shot echoed through the valley. Williams had engaged the first of Hayes's soldiers. The sharp crack was followed by return fire, the sound of automatic weapons filling the air. Marcus and Rivera climbed faster, no longer worried about stealth. Every second counted now. The medical kit on Marcus's back felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but he couldn't leave it behind. The medical cross that David had carved into the rock was their only way to identify the right cave. 75 feet up, Marcus spotted it. A small but unmistakable medical cross carved into a flat section of rock face just to the left of a narrow cave opening. "David's mark, there," he called to Rivera, pointing. She followed his gaze and nodded. "I see it, the final 25 feet were the hardest." The rock face curved inward, forcing them to climb almost upside down. Marcus's shoulders burned with the effort, and his hands were raw from gripping the rough stone. Rivera reached the cave first and hauled herself inside. A moment later, her hand appeared to help Marcus up the final few feet. He grabbed it gratefully and rolled into the cave, gasping. The cave was small but deep, extending back into darkness beyond what the daylight could illuminate. Near the entrance, Marcus could see that someone had been here recently. A sleeping bag, some canned food, and what looked like communications equipment. David was living here, Marcus realized. Rivera was already moving deeper into the cave, following a string of battery-powered LED lights that David had strung along the wall. He was here for weeks, maybe months. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a base of operations. The lights led to a natural chamber about 30 feet back from the entrance. Marcus gasped when he saw what David had created here. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, maps, and charts. Red string connected various points like a conspiracy theorist's dream, but this was all too real. In the center of the chamber sat a military-grade laptop connected to several external hard drives. Video equipment, recording devices, and communication gear were arranged on a makeshift table made from stacked rocks. Rivera was studying the wall displays. "My God, Marcus, your brother documented everything." Marcus moved closer to examine the photographs. He recognized Hayes and Morrison, but there were dozens of other faces he didn't know. Military officers, civilians in expensive suits, men in foreign uniforms. Each photo had dates, locations, and notes written in David's careful handwriting. "Look at this," Rivera said, pointing to a detailed map of the region. He tracked their entire operation. Supply routes, meeting locations, financial transfers, it's all here. The laptop was still running, protected by a password screen. Marcus tried a few obvious combinations. David's birthday, their mother's maiden name, military service numbers. Nothing worked. Gunfire echoed up from the valley below. Williams was still holding his position, but it sounded like he was facing heavier opposition now. "Try medical terms," Rivera suggested. Johnson said he left this for a medic to find. Marcus thought about his brother's sense of humor and tried Cortman. The laptop unlocked immediately, displaying a desktop filled with video files, audio recordings, and document folders. Rivera opened one of the video files. The screen filled with Hayes's face, but he was wearing civilian clothes and sitting across from a man in what looked like Middle Eastern dress. The conversation was in English, and it was devastating. "The next shipment will include 50 M4 rifles, 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and 6 anti-tank missiles," Hayes was saying. "The price is $2 million, as agreed." The foreign man nodded. "And the intelligence reports?" "Troop movements for the next 6 months, plus tactical assessments of 3 forward operating bases. That's an additional $500,000. Marcus felt sick. His brother had recorded Hayes selling not just weapons, but strategic military information that could get American soldiers killed. Rivera was checking other files. "There are dozens of these meetings. Look at the dates. This has been going on for over 2 years." The sound of a helicopter approaching made them both look toward the cave entrance. Hayes's people had found their climbing route. "We need to copy everything," Marcus said, pulling out the satellite phone Rivera had taken earlier. "Can we upload these files?" Rivera was already working on it. "The phone has enough memory for the most important files, but not everything. We need to prioritize." Marcus opened more video files while Rivera worked on the upload. Each one was worse than the last. Hayes wasn't just selling weapons and information. He was coordinating attacks on American positions to cover up his activities. Soldiers had died to protect his operation. "Look at this," Marcus called Rivera over to one particular video. "This is dated 3 days before David died." The video showed David himself speaking directly to the camera. He looked exhausted and frightened but determined. "If you're watching this, it means something happened to me," David's image said. "I've discovered a conspiracy that goes all the way up the chain of command. Colonel Hayes and his team are selling weapons and intelligence to enemy forces, but they're not the real power behind this operation." David held up a photograph. Marcus leaned closer to see it clearly and felt his blood turn to ice. The photo showed Hayes shaking hands with a man in an American general's uniform. General Morrison, Captain Morrison's father, is running the entire operation. David continued. He's using his position in Pentagon procurement to identify weapon shipments that can be lost or damaged and sold on the black market. The intelligence sales are financing expansion of the operation. Rivera grabbed Marcus's arm. "That's why they're so desperate to stop us. This isn't just about Hayes, this goes all the way to the Pentagon." The helicopter was getting closer. They could hear rappelling gear being deployed, which meant Hayes's people would be climbing up to them within minutes. Marcus looked at the walls covered with evidence, the laptop full of incriminating files, and the satellite phone that could broadcast the truth to the world. David had spent months, maybe years, gathering this evidence. He had died for it. Now it was up to Marcus to make sure that sacrifice meant something. "How much have we uploaded?" he asked. Rivera checked the phone's status. "About 60%. But we're running out of time." The sound of boots on rock was getting closer. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Take the phone and go," he told Rivera. "Get to the back of the cave and find another way out. I'll buy you time to finish the upload." Rivera looked at him with something like horror. "Marcus, no. We stick together. My brother died alone trying to expose this conspiracy. I'm not going to let you die too." Marcus checked his medical kit and found the emergency flare he always carried. "Go. That's an order." Rivera hesitated for one more second, then grabbed the satellite phone and the most important hard drives. "Don't you dare get yourself killed, Marcus Chen. The world needs to hear your story too." She disappeared into the darkness at the back of the cave, just as the first shadow appeared at the entrance. Marcus activated the emergency flare, bathing the chamber in brilliant red light, and prepared to make his last stand in his brother's monument to the truth. The red flare cast dancing shadows on the cave walls as Hayes entered with 3 soldiers, their weapons trained on Marcus. In the crimson light, David's evidence looked like something from a nightmare: photographs of betrayal, documents of treason, maps marking the graves of American soldiers who had died for profit. "Step away from the equipment. Sergeant Chen," Hayes ordered, his voice echoing in the chamber. Marcus remained where he was, one hand on David's laptop, the other holding his medical kit. "Impressive operation your brother discovered," he said conversationally. "How many soldiers died to keep General Morrison's bank account happy?" Hayes's face twitched. "You don't understand the complexities of modern warfare. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. Like murdering whistleblowers? Like preventing intelligence leaks that could compromise ongoing operations." Hayes stepped closer, his weapon still aimed at Marcus's chest. "Your brother was going to expose activities that were serving the greater good." Marcus laughed bitterly. "The greater good? You were selling weapons to the same people who were killing American soldiers. We were controlling the flow of weapons to gather intelligence on enemy operations." David couldn't see the bigger picture. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The videos on David's laptop made it clear that Hayes and his conspirators were motivated by greed, not patriotism. But Marcus played along, buying time for Rivera to finish the upload. "Show me the bigger picture then," Marcus said. "Explain how selling anti-tank missiles to insurgents serves American interests." Hayes seemed genuinely convinced of his own righteousness, which made him even more dangerous. "Those weapons were tracked. Every sale gave us intelligence on insurgent networks, supply chains, operational planning. We prevented more attacks than we enabled. And the intelligence sales? How did giving away troop movements serve the greater good?" For the first time, Hayes looked uncomfortable. "Some information had to be sacrificed to maintain our credibility with enemy contacts." Marcus felt rage building in his chest. You got soldiers killed to maintain your cover story. Casualties are inevitable in war, Hayes said coldly. The question is whether they serve a purpose. One of Hayes's soldiers was examining David's wall of evidence. Sir, we need to destroy all of this. If even part of it gets out, I know, Hayes snapped. Set charges throughout the cave. We'll bring down the whole mountain if we have to. Marcus watched in horror as the soldier began placing explosive charges among David's carefully organized evidence. Months of work, proof of massive corruption and treason was about to be buried forever. You can't cover this up, Marcus said desperately. Too many people know the truth now. Hayes smiled. Sergeant Rivera and Corporal Williams won't be sharing their knowledge with anyone. And you, he shrugged. Another tragic casualty of war. The soldier setting charges called out from near the cave entrance. Sir, we've got a problem. Rivera's gone and she took some of the equipment with her. Hayes's calm demeanor cracked. What do you mean gone? There's another passage at the back of the cave. She must have escaped that way. Marcus tried not to smile. Rivera was still alive and, more importantly, she was still uploading David's evidence to the outside world. Every minute Hayes spent in this cave was another minute for the truth to spread. Find her, Hayes ordered 2 of his soldiers. She can't have gotten far with her injuries. As the soldiers disappeared into the cave's depths, Marcus made his move. He had been slowly reaching into his medical kit, and now he pulled out the morphine syringe he always carried for emergency pain relief. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all he had. Hayes saw the movement and tensed. Don't even think about it, Sergeant. You know what the funny thing is? Marcus said, still holding the syringe. David always said the hardest part of being a soldier wasn't facing the enemy. It was trusting the people fighting beside you. Your brother was naive. No, he was honest. He believed that American soldiers were the good guys. Marcus looked around at the evidence covering the walls, right up until he discovered that some of the good guys were actually worse than the enemy. The remaining soldier finished setting his charges and looked to Hayes for orders. 15 minutes and counting, sir. Hayes nodded. Signal the helicopter for extraction. We'll be out in 10 minutes. Marcus realized with growing desperation that Rivera needed more time. The satellite phone upload would take at least another 5 minutes to complete the most critical files. He had to stall somehow. Before you kill me, Marcus said, I want to understand something. How did General Morrison recruit you? Hayes checked his watch impatiently. Does it matter? Humor a dead man. Hayes seemed to consider this. Morrison approached me 2 years ago, said he had identified inefficiencies in the weapons procurement system that could be turned to our advantage. At first, it was just about reducing waste. When did it become about profit? When we realized how much money was involved. The Pentagon orders millions of dollars in weapons that never get used properly. They sit in warehouses, get damaged in transport, become obsolete due to changing tactical requirements. We were just redirecting resources that would otherwise be wasted. Marcus shook his head. You were stealing weapons and selling them to terrorists. We were conducting off-the-books intelligence operations with non-traditional funding sources. Hayes corrected. Everything we did had strategic value. It was the rationalization of a man who had convinced himself that treason was patriotism. Marcus had seen it before in corrupt officials who started small and gradually descended into deeper and deeper betrayal. Gunfire echoed from somewhere deeper in the cave. Hayes's soldiers had found Rivera's trail. She's armed and desperate, Marcus said. Your men might not come back, Hayes spoke into his radio. Status report, a voice crackled back. Found blood trail heading toward the rear exit. She's wounded and moving slow. We'll have her in 5 minutes. Marcus felt his heart sink. Rivera was running out of time and options. The upload might not complete before Hayes' people caught up with her. The soldier with the detonator checked his timer. 8 minutes to detonation, sir. Hayes made his decision. We leave now. If Rivera is still in the cave when it collapses, problem solved. If she escaped, we'll track her down outside. Marcus watched in horror as Hayes and his remaining soldier moved toward the cave entrance. David's evidence, the proof of massive corruption and the murder of American soldiers, was about to be destroyed forever, unless Marcus could find a way to stop them. The morphine syringe was still in his hand. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, when everything else failed, a medic's oath to do no harm had to give way to a soldier's duty to protect the innocent. Marcus looked one last time at David's photograph on the laptop screen, took a deep breath, and attacked. Marcus lunged forward with the morphine syringe, aiming for Hayes' neck. The colonel was fast, but 3 years of close-quarters combat training gave Marcus the edge. The needle found its mark just below Hayes' ear, and Marcus pressed the plunger home. Hayes stumbled backward, clawing at the injection site. "What did you—" 50 milligrams of morphine, Marcus said grimly. "You've got about 2 minutes before you lose consciousness." The remaining soldier spun toward Marcus, but the tight confines of the cave worked against him. Marcus grabbed David's laptop and swung it like a club, catching the soldier across the temple. The man dropped unconscious. Hayes was fighting the drug but losing. His vision was already blurring and his movements were becoming uncoordinated. "The charges," he mumbled. "Can't stop." Marcus grabbed the detonator from the unconscious soldier. 6 minutes remaining. Enough time to disarm some of the charges, but not all of them. He had to make a choice, save David's evidence or save Rivera. The choice was easy. Marcus grabbed the most important hard drives in David's laptop, stuffed them into his medical kit, and ran toward the back of the cave. Behind him, Hayes collapsed, still conscious but unable to move. The rear passage was narrow and descended steeply into darkness. Marcus could hear gunfire ahead, which meant Rivera was still fighting. He followed the sound, using his tactical flashlight to navigate the treacherous footing. The passage opened into a larger chamber with multiple exits. Blood drops on the floor showed Rivera's path, leading toward what looked like a natural chimney that rose toward the surface. Marcus could see daylight far above. "Rivera!" he called out. Her voice came from somewhere overhead. "Marcus, I thought you were dead." "Not yet. But we've got 4 minutes before Hayes' people blow the cave. How's the upload?" 90% complete. "But I'm trapped up here. Hayes' soldiers are covering the exit." Marcus looked up the chimney. It was a difficult climb even for someone uninjured. For Rivera, wounded and exhausted, it would be nearly impossible. But she had made it this far, which meant she was running on pure determination. The sound of boots in the passage behind him made Marcus turn. Hayes' backup team had arrived, probably alerted when their colonel missed his scheduled check-in. Marcus could see flashlight beams bouncing off the walls. 3 minutes, he called to Rivera. "Can you finish the upload?" "Almost there." "But Marcus, even if I get this out, they'll just deny everything. Say the files are fake, that we're terrorists or traitors." Marcus thought about Johnson's final words, about David's sacrifice, about all the soldiers who had died to protect Hayes' operation. "Not if we have a witness." He pulled out the blood-stained notebook Rivera had given him back at the aid station. In the chaos of the escape, he had forgotten about it. Now he opened it and found exactly what he had hoped for. Detailed notes about Hayes' operation, written in Rivera's careful handwriting. Names, dates, financial records, everything needed to corroborate the electronic evidence. But more importantly, the notebook contained something else. A list of journalists, congressional investigators, and military officers that Rivera's team had identified as trustworthy, people who could be contacted if the mission went wrong. Marcus spoke into Rivera's satellite phone. "This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, U.S. Navy Medical Corps. I'm uploading evidence of a massive conspiracy involving the sale of American weapons and intelligence to enemy forces. The conspiracy involves Colonel Hayes, Captain Morrison, and General Morrison of Pentagon Procurement." He could hear Rivera's voice echoing down from above as she did the same thing, broadcasting their story to multiple recipients simultaneously. Between the two of them, they were ensuring that the truth would reach people who could act on it. The pursuing soldiers were getting closer. Marcus could hear them arguing about which passage to take. In 2 minutes, the whole cave system would collapse, taking everyone inside with it. "Rivera, you need to get out of there now. Upload complete." "I'm climbing." Marcus made his own escape plan. The passage he had come through led back to Hayes and the main cave, which would be ground zero when the charges detonated. But there were other passages leading deeper into the mountain. If he could find one that led to the surface, a rifle shot echoed through the chamber, followed by Rivera's cry of pain. She had been hit. Marcus looked up the chimney and could see her silhouetted against the daylight, but she wasn't moving. Blood was dripping down from above. "Rivera!" "I'm okay," she called back weakly. "Just winged me. But I can't climb with one arm." 1 minute remaining. Marcus made the hardest decision of his life. He climbed. The chimney was vertical rock with just enough handholds to make ascent possible. Marcus's shoulders burned as he pulled himself upward. his medical kit banging against the stone walls. Above him, Rivera was trying to help, reaching down with her good arm. 30 seconds. Marcus reached Rivera just as Hayes's soldiers entered the chamber below. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the walls around them. Marcus grabbed Rivera around the waist and continued climbing, using his legs to push off the walls while his arms pulled them both upward. 15 seconds. They burst out of the chimney onto a rocky ledge high above the valley. Marcus could see Hayes's helicopters circling below and vehicles racing away from the cave system. Everyone was evacuating. 10 seconds. Marcus covered Rivera with his body as the mountain exploded beneath them. The detonation was massive, much larger than Marcus had expected. Hayes hadn't just set charges in David's cave. He had brought down the entire network of passages. Tons of rock collapsed inward, sealing off everything David had discovered. But it was too late. The evidence was already uploaded, already spreading across the internet and into the hands of investigators who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Rivera managed a weak smile as they lay on the ledge. Watching the dust cloud rise from the destruction below, your brother would be proud. Marcus pulled out the satellite phone and dialed the number for his commanding officer back at base. It was time to come in from the cold and face whatever consequences awaited them. But first, he opened David's laptop one more time and looked at his brother's final video message. In it, David had said something that Marcus was only now beginning to understand. The truth doesn't belong to the people who discover it, David's image said. It belongs to everyone who has the courage to share it. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a congressional hearing room, watching as General Morrison was led away in handcuffs. Hayes had died from his morphine overdose in the collapsed cave. But Morrison and 17 other conspirators had been arrested based on the evidence David had gathered. Rivera sat beside him, her arm still in a sling, but her voice strong as she testified about the conspiracy that had cost so many lives. Williams had survived his injuries and was scheduled to testify the following week. The scandal had rocked the Pentagon and led to massive reforms in weapons procurement and oversight. Dozens of families finally had answers about how their loved ones had really died, and new safeguards were in place to prevent future betrayals. Marcus carried David's photograph in his wallet now, along with a small piece of stone from the Valley of the Stone Dogs. Every morning, he looked at both and remembered that some truths were worth dying for, but more importantly, some truths were worth living for. The hearing recessed for lunch, and Marcus stepped outside into the Washington sunshine. Somewhere out there, other soldiers were serving their country with honor, trusting that the people leading them shared their commitment to protecting America and its values. Thanks to David's sacrifice and the courage of people like Rivera, Johnson, and Williams, that trust was a little more justified today than it had been yesterday. And sometimes, Marcus thought as he walked down the steps of the Capitol building, that was the best any soldier could hope for, to leave the world a little more honest than they found it. The truth had finally come home.